nursing news. On tonight's segment, we will be recapping the most important aspects of nursing from 1911 to now, 1920. I'm Paige Daniels.
And I'm Holly Fenimore.
We'll be reviewing public perceptions of nursing, important events, widespread trends, and influential people in the nursing world in the past 10 years. So let's begin with public perception. Women's roles in the house and in the public were a large factor in the rise of nursing. Women were seen as only wives and mothers and not accepted in the public eye. Women could not vote, they could not serve on juries, or run in any sort of elected office. Their economic situation was purely dependent on their marital status. Women were able to march and rally against these issues with many women empowerment organizations, such as Women's Christian Temperance Union, Young Women's Christian Association, the Settlement House Movement, and the General Federation of Women's Clubs. These organizations and the passing of the 19th Amendment brought the fight for women's rights to a close just this year in 1920.
Though women were typically confined to the household, nursing was one profession that was deemed acceptable for women by society. In fact, nurses had a very positive image during this time. When someone would see a young single woman in a uniform on the street, they associated Christianity, goodness, compassion, and care with her. As you can see, nursing uniforms are white, modest, and clean. Most nurses also wear caps that are unique to the hospital they work at. On the other hand, it is not seen as socially acceptable for men to be trained as nurses. There are still only 4 schools that will actually accept men into their nursing programs.
Now let's move on to the important events that have shaped nursing. The Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914 made certain medications and drugs available only by prescription in the United States. In 1915, a tuberculosis campaign began to study and prevent the spread of tuberculosis that was taking hold around the world. The American Red Cross also established the Town and Country Services in the same year to reach rural areas in need of medical care nationwide. And then in 1917, the National League for Nursing Education made its first standard curriculum for nursing schools across the country. This was the very first nationally endorsed curriculum guide for nursing training programs. The Spanish flu also took hold from 1917 to 1918. That crisis took the lives of 20 million worldwide.
The U.S. had also entered World War I in 1917. Where there is war, there is a great need for medical personnel to tend to the sick and the wounded. About 23,000 nurses served in the Army and the Navy, with nearly 10,000 of them actually serving overseas. There were new nursing military corps schools that many nurses graduated and went on to serve from. At least 2 nurses at this time were given the second highest honor in the military, the Distinguished Service Cross, among whom were Beatrice Mary McDonald and Helen Grace McClelland. Sadly, over 260 nurses sacrificed their lives during the war. The majority of those deaths were due to the influenza epidemic sweeping across Europe at that time.
All of these crucial events inspired many changes in nursing as we know today. There are some important trends to note as well. Up until the 1900s, there were many immigrants coming in, as there still are today. These immigrants arrived with little to nothing in a foreign country. These rough beginnings led to poor living conditions, and those poor living conditions gave way to various sicknesses. Over the past decade, many nurses have taken it upon themselves to help heal and educate the public. Thus, public health nursing was on the rise.
Another important trend was the transformation of nursing education. Before 1910, most schools were teaching basic skills to practice nursing. As the decade has gone on, education for nurses has moved out of training schools and into colleges. This shift has provided our nurses with a well-rounded education and practical skills along with science and math. These colleges have produced bright young women ready to heal our sick. Speaking of schools, over the past few years, our youth have been getting great care without ever having to go to a hospital. School nurses have become the new normal within our school systems.
Thank goodness for that.
Not only is that aiding our children in learning, but it has also provided new job opportunities for nurses.
At this time, we would like to thank the influential and sometimes radical women who have changed nursing forever. This list includes only a few of the many who worked hard to bring about change we see today. Firstly, we would like to say a big thank you to the woman who did what many frown upon in the hopes of providing women with more options and a little bit of empowerment. Margaret Sanger, thank you for opening the first clinic for birth control just 6 years ago in 1914.
Our next thank you goes to Jane Delano. Jane recognized a need for nurses in World War I and took it upon herself to recruit over 20,000 nurses to serve. She worked through the Red Cross Reserves. Thank you, Jane.
Speaking of radical, how about Lavinia Dock? Miss Dock was not only a Bellevue Nursing School supervisor, but she also campaigned tirelessly for women's rights. Thank you, Lavinia. Women like you are the reason we can vote today.
And as previously mentioned, school nurses have been popping up across the country. One who led the way for so many was Miss Percy Powers. She was the first school nurse in North Carolina. Thank you, Miss Powers, for healing our kids.
Last but certainly not least was sweet, sweet Martha Minerva Franklin. She powered through these racist times to be the only black graduate of her class at the Women's Hospital Training School. She didn't stop there. She then went on to organize the National Association for Colored Graduate Nurses. Thank you so much, Martha, for promoting racial equality in nursing. And that's the end of our segment. Thanks so much for tuning in and remembering with us how so much has changed in these past 10 years. We look forward to the future of nursing with hope and a love for this profession. Catch us next week for Holly's rendition of Prohibition Blues.
You won't want to miss it. Bye.
What ails you, brown man? What makes you frown, man? Said a gal to her man, so miserable.